what America wants. Nice and calm. You're almost there.
Yeah, I did it. I cried 2 tears in a bucket. Fuck it. Let's take it to the stage.
You dig it? You knock a dude down, you get some respect.
Hey, hello, happy Monday. Hey, listen, I'm not going to tell anybody what I was doing for the 3 or 4 minutes before we just went live, okay? You're not supposed to tell on yourself, but I was just talking to myself because I didn't hit the go live button. So thank goodness y'all didn't hear what I said before I hit the go live button for real. Anyway, listen, welcome to the Black Man Unfiltered Network, and like, share, subscribe to the channel. Hit that hype bell if you see the hype, hype this thing up. And, this is going to be a good conversation, I think. The topic of birthright citizenship is something that the average American probably never thinks about. And this is where people who hate Trump don't give him enough credit. Now, from the time he signed that executive order of trying to change birthright citizenship, everybody should have known that it was going to go straight to the courts, that executive order cannot change an amendment to the Constitution or change or reinterpret a constitutional amendment. So from my standpoint, I thought it would be interesting to see how the powers and the levers of government would work on his desire to challenge birthright citizenship. And this is exactly what's going on. Now, the mainstream media would have you feel like there's an attack on American society, but that's bullshit. It really is. Not that he wants to change stuff that's in a radical way, but if you were an executive, if you became president, just like if I became president, wouldn't you challenge the levers of power, right? Say, here's the executive bubble, and there's a bunch of rules that govern the executive branch, just like the other branches, and you're the executive. And some of these rules are nebulous. They're not codified to where they say you must do this or that. They give you some leeway. So if I was president, I'd be challenging the bounds of my power all the time. All the time. Then I would expect the Congress and I would expect the judiciary to put me in check where I'm out of bounds. And that's how our government was set up. So I wouldn't get overly emotional against Congress trying to do something that they feel is within their bounds, or the judiciary trying to do something that's within their bounds. Okay, so as an executive, the things that I do to challenge my power is dependent on my imagination and how much the population likes or loathes me. If they like me, they're not going to challenge everything I try to do. But if you hate me like half the country does about Trump, then everything he tries to do, good or bad, they're going to challenge. So birthright citizenship is one of those things, okay, that he came out in the beginning and he said he wants to change that. Now, the philosophy of it, I can dig, but I got to be honest. Even though I voted for Trump over the Kamala, I didn't think, I never really thought about birthright citizenship other than just accepting it as one of our basic tenets of being American. If you made it to America and one of your kids got born here, right? Okay, they made it. They made it to utopia. They made it to a place that God sanctioned as one of the best places in the entire world to live. The American experiment. I didn't have any problem with other people experiencing that. And I think most Americans didn't, not the fact that we didn't think about other countries using that to their advantage, to take advantage of our system of government so they could try to destroy us from within. But, even with that, let's put the nefarious reasons aside. One of the things that, like I said, so this court case is going to be interesting on how it's going to play out with birthright citizenship. Anyway, so I got a couple of things I put together. This might not be a long stream, and you guys could put how you feel about it in the chat. You could join the show. Black Man Unfiltered dropped the link here. You got to put yourself on camera and all that kind of stuff, or else I can't let you up. And I got a bunch of stuff that I want to, not a bunch, but just a few things on birthright citizenship, and I think all of us are living today. I kind of believe that we don't have any problem with it, but we're finding out that people are taking advantage of us as a country because of birthright citizenship. All right, so here's a person talking about, look how people are struggling in Haiti and Africa. Okay, so what do you mean by that? I mean, is it Americans' job to ease their pain, to allow them to come here? And what do they have to offer us to make America better? Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not just people in destitute countries that should come here. It's people who are looking for something they don't get in the other country. But it's not for us to provide a welfare system to other people, right? We got enough of our own destitute that we have to handle as opposed to other people. So that's another thought when we talk about birthright citizenship, this utopia that people want to use us from. And I got a couple of clips that I put together that we can go through and talk about, and I'll stop and start them. And you guys can tell me, I got a little piece of the opening argument from the government on what they think. And so it's going to boil down to a couple of things, like what does it really mean to say things like, the issue of the subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And the other part is, lawful domicile. These are two kind of key words that kind of distinguish legal from illegal aliens and certain natures of how do you look at a person who's a resident here, who's actually domiciled, or a resident here who's under the jurisdiction of the United States, and those kind of things. So there's a lot of arguments there. And then here's the one thing that I think almost none of us, I never heard this until President Trump signed that executive order, and we're going to go through some of that in a second. I had no idea that the Chinese government, that the Chinese were one of the first groups, because of the Exclusion of Chinese Act and the fact that a guy who was 21 years old, who was born here, and his parents were here, but they couldn't be citizens, but they went back to China. He established himself back in China. He came back to America and said, I'm a citizen. And he won the case. That's his name is Kim Ark, right? And he won. And he won on the basis of how the 14th Amendment is written. You know what I'm saying? He won. So he was the Chinese were the first immigrant group standing on the back of blacks in order to get their way into America, and they won. Now, I don't have any problem with Asian or Chinese people for the most part. But through the years, I found out that Chinese people don't particularly like black people. Okay, in mass, they don't particularly. Nobody particularly likes us. Even black people don't like black people for the most part, which is sad. But they made their inroads into the United States on the backs of black people. The alphabet mafias made their inroads on the backs of black people. White women have made their inroads on the backs of black people. Everybody uses black people to shit on in order for them to get ahead. And it's a crazy thing. I didn't mean to say that I was going to go down this path and I'm going to leave it. But it seems like we're the fodder for everybody to get ahead. If you did this for the blacks, you should do this for us too. And then once they do it for you, y'all forget about the people, the shoulders that y'all stood on to get what you want. You know what I'm saying? Because nobody else speaks for us. Nobody. So I didn't know the Chinese became American citizens, destroyed the Exclusion of Chinese Act using the 14th Amendment, which was really written to give citizenship to the descendants of slaves. So it was a civics lesson. You learn something new because the president wanted to change some shit. So here's President Trump's, and this is like an icebreaker, and a lot of people might not like this, but I think his President Trump's, how he sees what he wants to do to the 14th Amendment and change it, and how he's mad at people taking advantage of it. And in this case, you tell me who you think Trump is, and you tell me who you think is the victim of his ire, okay? And some of you might think this is funny and some of you don't, but I'm going to play it as an icebreaker anyway.
You out here in my barrel, man? Yeah. I don't know. You better get on somewhere. Yeah, you don't got to get my barrel like that, man. Unchecked, man. What you yeah, man. No, Carlos, don't break this up. She knew what time it was. She knew what time it was. Hey, I want you to marvel and reflect on your actions and the ramifications of your actions. Man, look at your friend over there on the jungle gym. That tree ain't gonna save you. That tree ain't gonna save you. You shouldn't have been up in my barrel. Hey, man, let me go, Carlos. Let go of my chain, Carlos. But you need to know she don't need to be up in my barrel like that. You feel me? Oh, you.
The very first thing is, how the hell did she get in the barrel in the first place? Okay. And that's Trump saying, how did you get into this country in the first place? And of course, Trump is the ram. He's just knocking her ass around saying, why are you here and why should I give you citizenship? And it's it's bad. But anyway, I thought it was funny as hell. But anyhow, listen. Okay, so as we get started, some of you, some of you might already know, and some of you don't, that if you haven't seen the 14th Amendment, let's take a real quick, we don't have to go through it all, but I want to take a real quick look at it so you guys can see that it has 5 articles to it. Okay? 5 articles to the 14th Amendment. Let me see if you can see it. I got to share it with you. Let me do that. Let me share it with you. All right. So you can see it right there. So there's 5 articles, and the first one is the one that is in most of the arguments are going to be handled in the first section of the 14th Amendment, which talks about naturalized, a person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states within they reside. So not only are they talking about on a federal level as under the jurisdiction of the United States, but it also wants to cover, doesn't matter what state you were born in. Okay, so no state shall make or enforce any law that shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without the process of law, or deny to any person within the jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. Okay, so the truth of the matter is, no matter what state you were born on, if you're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and you're born or naturalized here, you're supposed to be a citizen. Now, the key is in whether you're legal or illegal, and whether you're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And there's some conversation that needs to be had here. Now, nowhere in any of these articles, you can read them yourself, that they talk about being a slave or a descendant of slaves. Okay, especially not in this first part. And so, one of the things that I think about the founders of, hey, man, what's going on, man? What's going on? If you want to, man, you can always pop up, brother, for sure. One of the things about the founders of the United States. Now, let's look at the founders. Now, HBO had a special, I think it was called John Adams. If you could ever go back and watch John Adams' special, it's a series about the white men, slave owners, the aristocracy who came to the United States that put together the revolution against the king back in England. Now, these were white men. Some of them were slave owners. They had no affinity for black people whatsoever other than slaves, and they were misogynistic and all this other kind of shit. They were the aristocrats of the old, but they wanted to be free. They wanted America for themselves. So when I look at the 14th Amendment, I look at it, why didn't they say that the 14th Amendment was explicitly to give slaves, the descendants of slaves and the children, why didn't they write that out? How come they didn't put that in there explicitly? And then I looked at the whole Constitution. If you look at the whole Constitution, nothing in the whole Constitution says, once we get rid of the king and have our own country, we want to make this place a safe haven for all white people. Just white people. Hell with the mongrels, hell with the blackies, hell with all these other people. This Constitution is just for white people. How come they didn't say that? That's what why did they get together and risk everything, their wealth, their freedom, their lives, to put together a country that almost anybody could benefit from? I still don't have the answer to that. Why? Why did they do that? And so, and I'm not an overly religious guy, but it being Easter week and shit like that, so maybe we could say that three things could have happened. They made a mistake when they were writing the Constitution. Maybe they made a mistake, or maybe they overlooked something, or just if it wasn't a mistake, did they do it on purpose? Did they write that stuff up on purpose? Or was it divine intervention that when they wrote the Constitution and they wrote the articles and they wrote the amendments, that you could drive a truck through it, so any person or any kind of category of human being could live under this Constitution, kind of the way it is today? And then if you look at Matthew, right, chapter 18, verse 20, you could get an inclination about when two or more people are gathered together with the spirit of Christian spirit, that pretty much miracles could have to happen in the resulting things that they're trying to do. So maybe it was divine intervention that they wrote the Constitution the way they wrote it. And maybe that spilled on to the 14th Amendment as well, where they didn't want to be specific to black people. So it allowed the Chinese to begin to benefit from being born here in the United States. And now it's expanding to every fucking people around the whole goddamn world. If you're born here, you're 8 months pregnant somewhere else in a shithole. You could be your baby could be born here in the United States, and they automatically are better off because they were here. So do we take that away? Do we say that, okay, that was the way it was before, but we can't have that happening now? Not anymore. Okay. So President Trump said, wait a minute, maybe some of our problems stem from the fact that not only do we have open borders, the way we interpret the Constitution draws the worst of the world to our country like a magnet. They're going to take advantage of our welfare system. They're going to take advantage of our kindness. They're going to take advantage of the fact they have nothing to offer us, but they could extract everything they can from the American way of life. They can get free health care. They can get free this. They can get free that. And they may or may not ever contribute anything back to us. And we're not even asking for allegiance. They don't have to learn English. They don't have to do shit. They could just come here and just suck us dry because they were born here, of illegal aliens. So I could understand his mindset. They have a population of people in Minnesota that they've been here for a generation, and still 80% of them are on welfare. And then the other 10% are milking the system dry. So how do we reconcile that? Because we're going to always have legal immigration here in this country. And how many kids born under legal immigration, that's not an issue. But when we blur the lines between legal and illegal, what does that mean? What does that mean? How much pressure can the taxpayer citizen, continue to take? How much of it? How much are we supposed to continue to take? Before, the America that we want to know and love is no longer American. You could look at New York City under the communist Zoran Mandani. He's going to destroy everything that we thought was middle class because he needs money to put his social programs in place, which are antithesis of capitalism. He's coming down on homeowners. He wants to lower the death tax from 7 million to 750K. He wants to take away the wealth of the average everyday American, not just rich. He lied to the stupid black assholes who voted for him, and now he wants to raise their taxes 10 to 11%. And they're sitting there fat, dumb, and happy, listening to all the black race hustlers that he was the better candidate than a stupid ass Cuomo. And the fact that the Democrats only put up an old broken down man against them is another thing. So I'm just telling you, when are we going to get smart enough to say that, if we want America to exist so the people who do hard work can continue to benefit, we can't have these kind of people in charge. So, or have the borders open so anybody could come here. So Trump kind of understands that. And as flawed as the man is, and as flawed as he is, character and everything else, he has an idea that we can't continue to be the welfare system of the world. We just can't do. We can't even afford the shit that we want to do. And then he went off the rails, of course, with the stupid war. So there you have it. So we can't even speak about him until he did something stupid like the war. And now he can't even afford that. And he's talking about some other dumb shit. And that's unfortunate. But up to that, because he promised he wouldn't do this, but he did it. So that's another story. But so get back on Birthright Citizens. The oral arguments are over. We're going to listen to some of that. But first, let me go ahead and show you some of the executive order. So out of the 5 sections of the amendment, okay, so now here's Trump's executive order. Okay, so we're gonna put that up, and I'm gonna let you guys see that, and we could talk a little bit about just the first part of it. Okay, so let me get rid of this, and let me go to the first part of his executive order. Now, can you guys see that? I think so. Yeah, you guys can see that. All right, so here's the executive order 160, protecting the meaning of and value of American citizenship. Now, just the title itself, I agree with, right? It should mean something to everybody to be an American. And if you listen to the libtards and the people who hate America, they place no value to being Americans at all. They say everybody should be able to, somehow benefit from just being here. No allegiance, right? No assimilation, nothing. No carrying the flag, nothing. And here's the thing I have with Black people, your so-called foundational Black Americans, the idiots who come down on a Chili from TLC, who come down on a Nick Cannon, who come down on anybody who has means, who doesn't bow the flag to the race-baiting hustlers who keep us on the plantation. In one breath, they spend all this time talking about how Blacks built America, how Blacks, because of the slaves, because of the work that the slaves done, America is flourishing. We got, everything that America stands for has been built on the backs of Black people. We've done so much. And you know what? A lot of that shit's true. And we did it for free. For free, as slaves for hundreds of years, generations. And so fast forward to 2026, we got those same raccoons coming out here talking about how we should give all our taxpayer dollars to illegal fucking people from around the world. We put all the blood, sweat, and tears in this country to get it to where it's at. But now we should just give it away to the fucking world. We should just give it away. Just put all your illegals in sanctuary cities. Give them free health care. Give them free education. Give them free housing. Give them every goddamn advantage that we've been fighting for. And now we got this fucking chick from the Senate or from the House who wants to give them reparations. We got all the Black raccoons out there. Mum's the word. So all the shit we did, we're willing to just give it away to the goddamn world. Right? No, there's no distinction between illegal and legal immigrants. Right? There's none. You listen to all the daggone, raccoon-faced assholes telling you that Trump is a bad guy, so he's bad, so we should just give away the store. In every sanctuary city, crime is up. Death is up. Blacks are poor as hell. Marriages suck. Our kids can't read. Everything. And we're going to give the country away. We're going to give it away to people who want to come here for a better life and shit on a life that you already have. You can't speak Spanish, can't get a job. And so and then 92% of the Black women listening to that bullshit, and all the sycophanted Black men who still listen to all that shit, nothing in the Democratic Party for you, but you want to give away the store to illegal immigrants. How can that be? How can that be? How can that be? Well, we've been slaves, only the Republicans hate us. But the Democrats want to give away all your votes, all your power, all your stuff by opening the borders and just letting anybody take root in your country. So that's what this says. He's saying, wait a minute, we need to put a stop to that. We need to at least put some kind of something in there. So his purpose, the privilege of the United States citizenship, is a priceless and profound gift. The 14th Amendment states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states where they're in, right? So every state. The provision rightly repudiated the Supreme Court of the United States for its shameful decision, in Dred Scott versus Sanford, right, which misinterpreted the Constitution and permanently excluded people of African descent from eligibility for the United States citizenship and solely based on their race. So now, listen, I'm not going to give Trump too much kudos for this, because just like feminism, all the freedoms that women should take, if it doesn't benefit them, they don't want. So the only freedoms they want is freedoms that benefit them. So let's not, Trump is no virtue of Black people. This situation in this particular order benefits him by saying Black people deserve to be Americans too. So do we, though, as Black people, do we hate him because he's using us for the benefit of his executive order? Yeah, that's up to you, right? So in this case, it benefits him to say something that's pro-Black, because that's exactly what the 14th Amendment was written for. Right after the 13th, it was written to say, okay, now that they're free, what do we do with them? Well, we got to give them citizenship. And then later on, almost at the end of the century, Kim Ark comes along and says, you know what? We could piggyback off of that. We could piggyback off of that because this shit's wide open. So you could read the rest of Trump's, his whatever in the executive order, but the first part says it all. Because the Dred Scott decision was a terrible decision and needed to be overturned. But who knew in 1898 that you could use the same amendment to destroy the Exclusion of Chinese Act as well? And maybe rightfully so. But I don't know. That's why they're in the Supreme Court, to reinterpret what that was. So there you have it. This wasn't going to be a long life. I mean, because some of you guys, you might believe in the fact that we should just let anybody just take root in this country and do what the hell they want. And if you made it on your own, great. If you didn't, you just shit out of luck. You had an opportunity and you got overturned. So anyway, so I have a string, like I said, this wasn't going to be a long live because I don't need to just keep ranting over this. Anybody could put in the chat what they think. Do you agree with birthright citizenship or not? A 1 for agreeing, a 2 for not? Should we keep it? That's a 3. Should we keep birthright citizenship the way it is and don't touch it? Put a 3 in the chat. That's all I'm saying. So like I said, I mean, anybody who wants to come up, you want to come on camera, and you can tell me where I'm wrong and blah, blah, blah. And we can go from there. As long as we try to keep it respectful, that's fine. But here I have a series of clips. One, I want to give you guys a little glance or a little peep into what's been said to the Supreme Court, and a couple of clips that go on probably around 30 minutes. I'm going to stop and start and all that kind of stuff. And you guys can put in the chat what you think about what's being said. you know, and if you haven't really looked into birthright citizenship and what this might mean to this country, I just wanted to kind of peel back a little bit of the scab. So if you haven't, you can, because this is going to impact us, if not us right now, but your children or your grandchildren, you know. You know, whether you agree, somebody says, well, they don't agree with generic birthright citizenship. If you don't agree with generic birthright citizenship, what kind of changes do you think should be made? Now, they're not going to change the words of the Constitution. I don't think that that's what Trump is looking for. I think he's looking for a more fundamental reinterpretation of the Constitution. Like, for example, people will say, well, since PAC, since Park, whatever his name is, Ark, since Ark in 1898 set a precedence, and so here we are in 2026. Do you change that precedence over the last 130 years? Because we've been living under that birthright citizenship interpretation for that long. Do we change it? You know, and my retort to that is, just because we did something that could be wrong for 100 years doesn't mean we should continue to do it until the country is destroyed. You know, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, I can guarantee you that if our immigration policy doesn't change over the next 10, 15, 20 years, this won't be America anymore. It'll be just it'll be a communist country full of people who used to have, and a whole bunch of have-nots trying to take and laws that's being made by liberal women and sycophantic men to take away whatever you have, your ownership rights, your guns, right, your freedoms of speech, and all the things that you hold dear are in jeopardy. Everything you hold dear, and the fact is that the only thing holding it by a thread is a man who, I admit, has low character and is vulnerable because of the shit that he does. But the idea behind what he's trying to do would be formidable if he was a different man. If JD Vance had, or Rubio had advanced the same things Trump did, except this stupid ass war, the Republicans and conservatives would have a lock on the country, because there would be nothing about their character that you could try to attack to diminish all the good work and the thoughts he was doing. And of course, if it wasn't Trump, I would hope that Rubio or JD Vance wouldn't be susceptible to the fucking Netanyahu, who put a battery in Trump's back to make him go into this war that is going to be his downfall, and maybe the GOP's downfall as well. You know, so there you have it. You know, so let me get to some of these clips so I can stop talking, because here's my thing. You know, and unlike other people who come up and say they're content creators and they're all smart and that, I'm just another fucking asshole who decides that I want to live in the United States where we have some autonomy, that it means something to be an American. It means something to me to be an American, and my kids to enjoy the freedoms that this country gives that no other country in the world gives. And to see it being destroyed by ideology of idiots, is something that, even though I'm in my 60s, I might not have to live through, but my kids will. If I have grandkids, they have to live through. So you don't have to be some kind of Rhodes Scholar to love this country. You really don't. You don't. You just have to be somebody who has their eyes open. That's it. And it's sad, that we have to choose, because nobody's perfect. But if I didn't bring my list, but if I look at the list on the liberal side against the list on the conservative side, It's an easy choice for me. I'm gonna never be for open borders. I'm gonna never be for illegal immigrants. I'm gonna never be for mutilation of children with gender mutilation surgery. I'm never gonna be for men in women's sports. I'm never going to be for cashless bail where people can get back on the street and destroy human lives. I'm never going to be for that. I'm just never going to be for that. And I don't have to be MAGA or anything like that. Why would I ever be for that? How would a man with a dick ever be with testosterone, who loves women, who loves the future, who needs to be, in control? Why would we ever be for any of that shit? How? Oh man, let me take that down. So listen, I'm just saying, so listen, I didn't plan, maybe I did, but I didn't think I was going to get into this kind of rant the way I am. It's just frustrating to see people who, especially like for the Chile example, she clearly is not, she's clearly a conservative, but she got beat down by a whole bunch of liberal assholes, and she didn't have enough power or enough support to say, I'm standing my ground, right? I feel sorry for her because of her commercialism says that she couldn't be her own woman. Nick Cannon, a little bit more resilience, okay? And some other blacks, a little bit more resilience. But, we don't need a guy like D.L. Hughley and Ricky Smiley or Jamel Hill or any of these fucking people to tell us what kind of black people we need to be. We're not a cult. We're not a cult. And anybody who just votes rotely for one party, they're in a cult. If that one party tells them to drink Jim Jones Kool-Aid, some of them are gonna do. They already have. They're gonna be the ones dead in a field some way because the white man with the glasses told them that this is the best thing to do. There's a reason why black people are susceptible to the most bullshit in the whole world. I don't know what that reason is, but it seems like we're the biggest idiots in the whole fucking world. Everybody uses us. The Chinese used us for citizenship. The gays used us for, inclusion. The white women of all people in the whole world all of a sudden became a minority and took over affirmative action. How can that be? And we sit here champion the causes of feminism. Gloria Steinem put a battery in black women's back. Until today, they're still parroting the shit that she talked about. Meanwhile, she had husbands and children and all that kind of shit. Job well done, Gloria. Job well done. Job well done. And we got podcasts of women who hate men who don't want to have anything to do with the black woman, all this kind of shit, man, because they put batteries in our back and here we're flying and soaring, man. Soaring, man, soaring to the destruction of our subculture. And there's almost nothing we could do about it. Well, anyway, so why is birthright citizenship? Okay, so we're citizens. And now we want to give it away. Now that we're citizens and now we can reap the rewards that America has to offer, we're going to let the country get destroyed because we want to share with fucking people who don't deserve not one bit of it. Because they didn't put the work in. And for them to put the work in, that means you got to come to this country legally and go through the process. If you got a visa, you don't overstay your visa. You get a sponsor to extend it, or you go back home until you could come back. and you wait in line for your green card, just like everybody else has to. And then as you go through the 10-year process, you get some allegiance for this country. You learn to speak English. You establish residency. And you take that goddamn test to say you will pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And you don't go down in Los Angeles and have a parade down the street with fucking Mexican flags on American soil. You go to Minneapolis and you talk to any of the Somalis, none of them say they're Americans, only for citizenship. But every time you talk to them, I'm a Somali. I'm not an American, I'm Somali. As a one of the 300 million Americans, every time I hear somebody here who has citizenship taking advantage of our taxpayers, but they can't even say they're Americans, that should make you feel some kind of way. You don't have to hate nobody, but that should make you feel some kind of way. Anyway, so here's my thing. So here's some of the open arguments. I'm gonna play this so I can shut up. Hold on for a second. I'm gonna play this for a second. Wait a minute, I didn't mean to do that. I'm gonna play this so I can keep my mouth shut for a second. Share this with you guys. And I have a series of clips that, here's the opening arguments from General Sauer talking about the Constitution. And he's talking to the Supreme Court justices. And, and then I'm going to go through a couple of different ones. Now, I pieced a bunch of clips together. And these clips, go through a wide range of stuff. And we can stop and start. Anybody who wants to pop up and talk, I can stop and start at the same time. I'm not going to let it play through. I might stop at certain points just to kind of make certain things clear. But we're going to talk about the 14th Amendment and how that might apply to going back to the original interpretation that it was for the descendants of slaves. And what's going to keep coming up is the fact that subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And of course, what does it mean to be domiciled, right? And the distinction that has to be made between legal people being domiciled and illegal people being domiciled, okay? And legal people being under the jurisdiction thereof and illegal people being under the jurisdiction thereof. And how do we mesh all that together to say, hey, listen, no matter under what circumstances we talk about, two illegal people coming here and having a baby should make that kid an American citizen. And then, of course, that's the precedent that we have. But remember, even in 1898 deal with Park, right? Ark, even with him, his parents were immigrants. They weren't American citizens, but both of them were here legally when he was born. So there's a distinction there. They were both here legally when he was born, right? So that was his end, kind of, right? So they weren't illegal. They were on the books. So he was on the books, and so let's kind of go from that to saying two parents here who are illegal. And let me also say this before I get started. All of North America, Canada, and most of South America have birthright citizenship. So the truth of the matter is we're not the only country with birthright citizenship. So anybody who says that, that's a lie. The Southern Hemisphere, Canada, there's birthright citizenship in all the Americas. Okay? So that's that. So we have to understand that, it shouldn't be one size fit all, but, birthright citizenship in America is different than anywhere else because the people who come here who want to have birthright citizenship, what do they offer us in return? Besides us having to take care of them. Some of them grow up to be very valuable. I agree. But one out of what? 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, 1 out of 100, right? Like I said, the Somalis been here for generations. We're still paying 80% of them welfare. Anyway, so here goes. Let me share this. And we start from the beginning, and we'll go from there.
The children of temporary visitors are illegal aliens who have no such allegiance. This conclusion reflects the original public meaning of the clause. When Congress used the term "not subject to any foreign power" in the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it rejected the British conception of allegiance. Senator Trumbull explained that "subject to the jurisdiction thereof" in the clause means not owing allegiance to anybody else. And in 1884, this court recognized that "subject to the jurisdiction" means owing direct and immediate allegiance. The clause thus does not extend citizenship to the children of temporary visa holders or illegal aliens. Unlike the newly freed slaves, those visitors lack direct and immediate allegiance to the United States. For aliens, lawful domicile is the status that creates the requisite allegiance, and the text of the clause presupposes domicile. For decades following the clause's adoption, commentators recognize that the children of temporary visitors are not citizens, and illegal aliens lack the legal capacity to establish domicile here. Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship. It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules. It has spawned a sprawling industry of birth tourism, as uncounted thousands of foreigners from potentially hostile nations have flocked to give birth in the United States in recent decades.
I don't even know where to mute it. Thank you, sir. All right, so I don't know why I'm muted. Man, what happened to my audio? Anyway, so can you hear me now? Yeah. All right. One of the things that the guy said was, and I'm going to go back real fast. He said that people are jumping the line, and how critical and how disruptive people jumping a certain line is, even for minor things. We've seen battles rage because you jumped the line to try to get Nike sneakers or a concert ticket or whatever the hell it is, right? We've seen people go crazy. So now we have millions of people jumping the line to come to America, which disrupts the line of people coming here legally who have to wait 5 to 10 years to get their naturalized citizenship. And that's why when comes time to vote, you know, and people still get kind of amazed why so many Latinos voted for Trump, because they realize and they remember the shit they had to go through to become American citizens. And, you know, at some point, they don't really give a shit that you might be black or Hispanic or whatever the hell it is. You're doing something that their family had to go through shit to attain. They had to go through all kinds of time and pressure and all this and money. And you just want to jump in and take advantage of what they had to work for. This is the same thing when I hear black people talk about all the black sycophants come out for illegal immigration who hate ICE, calling the ICE agents the N-word and telling, other people they should call the brothers N-words because they don't like ICE. So we should be overrun by illegal fucking people because you have an ideological difference with Trump. And these are so-called the blackity blacks, right? The so-called Imhoteps and these fucking guys. Come on. You either believe that we put a lot of blood equity into this country, and if you believe that, how could you be willing to give it away to illegal immigrants because they got melanin in their skin? I hope that's not the case, because all the Somalis you know and love, they have a genocide going on back in their home country, and they're all black. They don't give a shit about the color of the people's skin. Are you a moose or are you a raccoon? That's all they care about. So, I'm just telling you, man, this whole skin color thing is just stupid because nobody honors that except black Americans. Anyway, let's go back to the oral arguments. If you're illegal and you're jumping the line, you piss people off.
Creating a whole generation of American citizens abroad with no meaningful ties to the United States. I welcome the court's questions.
General Sauer, before we get into the broader national issues, would you start with Dred Scott? Dred Scott was a case about state citizenship. It was a diversity case. And of course, we know what Chief Justice Taney did with that. How does the Citizenship Clause respond specifically to Dred Scott and answers or changes or corrects its answer as to citizenship? The other point is the Citizenship Clause refers not just to national citizenship, but also to state citizenship. Are we to have two different definitions for those? It's one word, citizens of the United States and citizens of the state wherein they reside. So as you begin, I'd like you to go back at the beginning and be more specific about the answer. And I want you to explain whether or not those two definitions are the same or related, and what state citizenship is based on.
Thank you, Justice Thomas.
Before I answer, I just want to let you guys know that, I think I got like maybe 8 minutes of this guy stopping. But some of it, I think you guys need to listen to get the context of the questions that's coming back to him. And but there's a whole lot more. And I cut that off until we get to the next person. But I just wanted to get the flavor of these guys talking to the justices. And I think the female justice that talked to him, I don't know who it is. It might be Brown Jackson, could be somebody else. But so we're going to take it that far, and it might be around the 8 to 9 minute mark. But I'll stop if I hear something to talk about. I just want to let you know that the context that we're going to be listening to this for a few more minutes.
Maybe start by addressing Dred Scott. As you alluded to the fact, Dred Scott, imposed one of the worst injustices in the history of this court, and it led to the outbreak of the Civil War. It's very clear in this court, in all of its early cases interpreting the 14th Amendment, said the one pervading purpose, the main object of the Citizenship Clause is to overrule Dred Scott and establish the citizenship of the freed slaves. And if you look at the debates in the congressional record and discussion surrounding the adoption of the Citizenship Clause, what you see is a very clear understanding that the newly freed slaves and their children have a relationship of domicile. They do not have a relationship to any foreign power. For example, there's a comment where he says, look, people have been here for 5 generations and clearly have no relationships to any foreign African potentate, or have a relationship of allegiance to the United States. And that reinforces our point that allegiance is what the word jurisdiction means. It doesn't mean regulatory jurisdiction or sort of being merely subject to the laws. They're talking and they're thinking about it in those debates about allegiance. Now, as to your second question, if you look at at the text of the clause, we believe it says, born in the United States, born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and the states of which they reside. So there's a constitutional guarantee that applies to both federal or national and state citizenship. And the key point we make there is that word reside, if you look at, for example, section 1473 of Justice Story's commentaries, was understood to mean domicile. So when they say subject to the jurisdiction, and then they go on to say you're a citizen of the United States and the state in which they reside, the very text of the clause itself presupposes that the citizen is domiciled in the United States. If they're present in a state at all, they reside there. Reside means domicile in the Constitution. And we think that strongly supports our interpretation. It's textual evidence of our domicile-based theory of jurisdiction.
Well, starting with that theory, you obviously put a lot of weight on subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But the examples you give to support that strike me as very quirky. Children of ambassadors, children of enemies during a hostile invasion, children on warships. And then you expand it to the whole class of illegal aliens are here in the country. I'm not quite sure how you can get to that big group from such tiny and sort of idiosyncratic examples.
There are those sort of narrow exceptions for ambassador foreign public ships. Tribal Indians is an enormous one that they were very focused on in the debates as well. But what I do is I invite the court to look at the intervening step, which is the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And there they didn't say subject to the jurisdiction thereof. There it says not subject to any foreign power. Now, if you go back to Blackstone and Calvin's case, they say it does not matter if you are subject to any foreign power. If you are born in the king's domains, you have this indefeasible duty of allegiance to the king at any time. So there's a clear repudiation in the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act is this breakwater, which makes it very, very clear that they are not thinking about allegiance in the terms of like the British common law. They've adopted the Republican conception of allegiance. So it's from not subject to any foreign power, and then the debates just a couple months later make it very clear that they're recodifying the same conception. They were dissatisfied with the potential ambiguity in the phrase Indians not taxed, and they adopted subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And one of the strongest statements of this is Senator Trumbull's statement that I quoted at the beginning, where he says, he's asked, what does that mean, subject to the jurisdiction thereof? And he says, it means not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means. And this court picked up on that in Elk against Wilkins when it says it uses, completely subject to the political jurisdiction, not mere regulatory jurisdiction.
So you see excuse me. So you see when they say subject to the jurisdiction, how important those phrases are, and how they argue these little points for different cases around that. And again, the media right now is putting out in the ether, right, that Trump's executive order doesn't have a chance. But you really can't tell until the justices deliberate in the back room after they heard all the arguments. So I wouldn't just count it out yet, but it's a good chance that it might not win, but not because the media is saying so.
What do you do with Wong Kim Ark's quote of Daniel Webster, who said, independently of a residence, with intention to continue such residence, independently of any domiciliation, independently of the taking of any oath of allegiance or renouncing any former allegiance. It is well known that by the public law, a non-citizen, while he is here in the United States, owes obedience to this country's laws. Now, the examples that Wong Ark Kim used as exceptions are situations in which there was not temporary allegiance to the United States. The children of foreign diplomats whose only allegiance was to their foreign country, and or occupied territory residents, including those citizens in Maine who had been occupied by the British forces. The US had no control over them. And the whole theory of the Indian tribes was similar. The Indian tribes were analogized to foreign diplomats. So what do we do with that?
I'd say two things. First, as the Indian tribes, we think that's a case that strongly supports us because, of course, by 1866 and 1868, there was strong understanding that the Indian tribes were subject to the United States' regulatory jurisdiction.
But not the same way that temporary foreigners were, meaning there was a real debate going on whether the U.S. actually had jurisdiction over Indian tribes. That's why our cases, for the longest time, until that was finally settled, said, absent some act of Congress, our laws don't apply. U.S. laws don't apply to Indians on Indian lands, correct?
I believe you look at the Rogers decision, for example, that we cite in our brief, where they say that they are subject to the
That's later. I'm talking at the time.
Yes, at the time. So as to
All right.
1817.
So what do you do during the debates of the 1866 Civil Rights Act and of the 14th Amendment, with the entire discussion of the people who opposed the amendment, who kept saying, we can't pass it because we're making citizens of gypsies who have no allegiance to anybody, and we're going to make citizens of Chinese people who can't be citizens because we're not going to permit them to be citizens. What do we do with those debates and the fact that the proponents of both acts said everyone who's born in the US will be citizens?
First, as that particular exchange, page 2890 of the congressional record from 1866, Senator Cowan gives this virulently racist statement where he says that. And what does he say right at the beginning of that sort of offensive speech? He says, we can't have children of gypsies, children of Chinese immigrants. We can't have them become citizens. And he says, quote, have they any more rights than a sojourner in the United States? So he's trying to persuade the Republicans to his view by appealing to a common understanding that sojourners do not have children who become citizens. So there's powerful evidence there that everybody understood this to, not sweep in the temporary sojourner. And that's why you see for 40, 50 years, you see every commentator who addresses the specific question of temporary presence saying it's not covered by the clause, including for decades after Wong Kim Ark.
Supreme Court of the United States here.
All right, so that was a good exchange there. And the point really is, I think she asked some good questions. As far as the American Indians, even though they had a whole bunch of treaties and stuff with America, there was no treaty that the American government actually honored at all. And so whether they liked it or not, the Indians absolutely were, when they were a conquered people, under the jurisdiction of the United States, whether they liked it or not. So, we all seen enough movies and read enough history to know how that story ended. And it's still going on today. So the point is that they didn't get into that, but there was no laws that were put in place that America and the people who were taking over the land of manifest destiny actually, adhered to. And on the surface, they might have said yes, but anytime they wanted to do whatever they wanted to Indians and on their land, they did. It's as simple as that. So the thing about gypsies, we don't never really talk about gypsies and stuff like that in America, but I know where she was coming from. And I don't think I really grasped his answer enough. Now, here's another lady that we're going to talk about. And of course, she has her opinion of how it's just cut and dry, that the way the Constitution is written is enough. No further interpretation required. Of course, you tell me what you think her political leanings are, but she's not hysterical about the way she's going about it. I don't know. I don't agree with her right off the surface, but she has some points she wants to give to you, and side shots not required. But I don't know why they gave them.
Oral arguments on whether or not President Trump can unilaterally rewrite the Constitution to fit his agenda. Specifically, they are taking up the issue of birthright citizenship, answering a question that can fundamentally change who Americans are and thus what America is. I'm collaborating with the ACLU to raise awareness on this issue. Here's the thing, the Constitution is crystal clear. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. But President Trump He wants to change the 14th Amendment, bake in a new exception, one that doesn't exist, one for children born to parents who are undocumented or have temporary immigration status, thus stripping potentially hundreds of thousands of children of citizenship in the only country that.
Okay, so let me stop you right there, okay? One of the hysterical parts, and it's hysterical, when they start talking about stripping people of citizenship. There's nothing about what they're trying to do that's going to be retroactive, right? If the Supreme Court changes or reinterprets the 14th Amendment, it is not going to be retroactive, right? It won't be, it'll be something like if they change things in terms of interpretation, it'll be projected somewhere in the future before it becomes enacted. It won't be like we're going to go back in the record books to determine who was born here and who's not. That part of it is the stupid shit, okay? That's the extremism that liberals will tell you to fearmonger. So her interpretation of how she says that it's cut and dry is fine. But once she delves into this thing about somehow retroactively saying who's a citizen and who's not, is where she falls off the rails. And she doesn't stay there for that long, but I just wanted to interject that. None of this shit is retroactive. So let's get that out of the picture, okay? None of it is, okay? So whatever they come up with, it has to be a projection into the future. And however we do that could be debatable, but nobody's going to go back through American records and decide who's American and who's not.
They have ever known as home, and irreparably changing how all of us would prove our right to call ourselves Americans. Now, many supporting President Trump's agenda, they're going to point to that one clause, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But here's the thing. The United States Supreme Court has already ruled on what that clause means, and I really think you should hear what they've had to say. The 14th Amendment affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory, including all children here born of resident aliens, with the exceptions or qualifications as old as the rule itself, of children of foreign sovereigns or their ministers, or born on foreign public ships, or of enemies within and during a hostile occupation of part of our territory. The amendment, in clear words and manifest intent, includes the children born within the territory of the United States of all other persons of whatever race or color domiciled within the United States. Every citizen or subject of another country while domiciled here is within the allegiance and the protection, and consequently subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. The Constitution is clear.
The Constitution might be clear in the moment, but it doesn't mean it's no longer subject to interpretation, okay? So right now it's in the favor of how you'd like to interpret it. The fact that we're back looking at it at the Supreme Court level means that the Supreme Court, not us, not the citizens and nobody else, that the court itself said they want to take a look at that particular interpretation. You know, so yeah, it's not just clear. It might be clear to me and you, or for the folks who want it to be the way it is. But, the Supreme Court has the discretion to not take cases. They didn't have to take this case. They could have just outright said, we're not gonna look at it. So the fact that they are looking at it means they don't agree with you, lady. They could relook at a ruling that's 100 years old, 150 years old, 1,000 years, whatever it is. The Constitution, quote unquote, is a living document, subject to changes for the future and reinterpretation of what was said in the past. It's as simple as that. So you got to take the good with the bad. So you got a point with the way that was written for Park, but that doesn't mean that because it was true for 125, 130 years, that it needs to be true for America for the next 1,000. That's where we are.
Supreme Court, the final arbiter on what the Constitution means? Well, it's already answered this question. So all eyes on the Supreme Court as the government asks it to ignore the plain language of this constitutional amendment, federal statute, and over 100 years of its own precedent. Today,
Carlos Valencia Gonzalez was born in Santa Ana, California in
Well, this is my man Will Kane, and he's got his little thing about, of course, he's against it. So I got a couple of different videos of people who are just taking little segments of this and saying why they're against birthright citizenship, why they're for it. You know, this is not legalese. The next couple of videos is just people talking about how they feel about it. So here's Will Kane. He has a show on Fox, and he's talking about a particular American citizen who's misusing his privilege.
1984. His parents were from Mexico. He happens to also be the stepson of El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. And now he is reportedly leading that very same cartel. And here's the thing. He is a United States citizen by birth. And it doesn't stop there. Reports of foreign wealth being used to manipulate the system. One Chinese billionaire reportedly has more than 100 U.S.-born children through surrogacy. The idea, build a future family and a business succession plan. Some clients, by the way, request up to 100 babies via multiple surrogacies. It can cost as much as $200,000. And why would they do that? Because babies born here are automatically U.S. citizens. Also,
well, you know, that's deep. I didn't know that was happening, that there's Chinese guys, you know, some organizations, some people who play the long game. So the guy's a billionaire, and so he's, surrogately impregnating hundreds of women so he could have American-born sleeper cells. You know what I'm saying? Effectively, because as far as, listen, other than aesthetics, Chinese-born Americans are just as American as anybody else in the strictest sense of the word, right? They'll speak English, but they'll probably know Mandarin and whatever Chinese dialect they need. And so if they're under this billionaire's sphere, he's training them for a specific purpose. What that purpose is, maybe one day we'll find out.
surrogacy is illegal in China. Nearly 41% of international surrogate parents in the United States are Chinese. So why is this such a debate? Look around the world. Much of Europe has restricted birthright citizenship. Asia basically ended it. The United States, still one of the few countries around the world that sits as an outlier.
Okay, so yeah, America is an outlier, but all of the Americas, South America, and Canada, I believe they all have birthright citizenship. And, they're not tripping over it the way we are, but those countries in South America or Canada are not the United States. You know what I'm saying? So we got another lady who's, I think, pro shut this shit down. Sister, I'm gonna let I gotta throw a black woman in there somewhere. Okay. So here you go.
Let's start here.
This message is for you. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in regards to what is truly birthright citizenship and who does it truly belong to. Now, President Trump, whether you like him or not, knows who birthright citizenship belongs to. He understands that birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment belongs to the descendants of freed slaves, not to all these illegal migrants coming up into the country, crossing the border on a rowboat or in the back of a truck or sneaking through a back door or an open window. It does not belong to them just because they come on American soil and give birth to a baby. Their children should not be American citizens. Oh, ma'am, that is so mean. No, it's not mean. And I am sick and tired. And you guys out there who I'm talking to ought to be sick and tired of everybody using Black people's struggles to get ahead. Everybody but Black people. The 14th Amendment was meant for descendants of freed slaves. Point blank, period. Write a letter. I don't care. And it's not mean. That's what it was meant for. How come you liberal white people don't fight for Black people on that? I know why. Because you really don't like Black people anyway. Because y'all are the true racists. I said it. I like to pit Black people against conservatives, but I don't see the conservatives out there yelling that the illegal migrants' children, I said illegal migrant, illegal alien. I know y'all don't like that term, but that's the right term. Illegal migrant children should be American citizens. They should not be. If their parents are illegal, then they are illegal. They are in illegal territory.
Okay, so listen, that last piece you just said, I mean, really, how can anybody really argue with that? Now, I think when we start talking about if they're here, both the parents are illegal, right? And the kid is born, the truth of the matter is, even if they're illegal, they actually are still under the jurisdiction of the United States, okay? But, okay, whether they're domiciled or not is another question. But here's where we have a rub, okay? Between sanctuary states and the United States federal government. Because I believe that the sanctuary states and cities do not recognize crossing the border as a crime. They do not search for it. They do not check for it. They do not ask people about their citizenship. So at the federal level, a crime has already been committed. But at the state level, in the sanctuary cities, they don't consider it a crime, right? So those two people are here, right, illegally, but they're getting the benefits of the United States. They're up in the first-class hotels. They got the $5,000 on the EBT card. Their kids taking up classroom seats in the poorest neighborhoods. You know, they're doing all that stuff. They're taking over community centers. They're doing all this stuff for illegals. That's why Chicago is broke, because the traitorous mayor has shit in the face of all his Black constituents. Same thing with, you know, Wu up in Boston. Same thing with the guy up in Colorado. No matter where there's a sanctuary city, the Black people in those places have been shit on. Okay, because of this distinction that sanctuary cities don't recognize crossing the border as a crime. The federals do, but they don't recognize those detainers. So therein lies the rub. Because at the federal level, a crime has already been committed, so they would have kicked those people out, or if they could catch them. That's where we have a problem. And those kids would not be considered an American citizen. Right. Anyway, so here we go.
Notice it's only liberal judges out there blocking President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. Notice that the dumb mayor in Chicago, Brandon Johnson's, whatever his name is, loves to say, my people were slaves. My people were slaves. But yet does everything in his power to fight for the illegal migrant and for them to have their children in the United States of America. Notice that all the liberal cities and states around this nation fight for the illegal migrant and their children more than they fight for the Black American who descendants were slaves, but yet they claim they love you so much. Yeah, right. So
here's one of my problems when I see Black women talk about these things that they don't like. She might, I don't know about her, but the chances are 92% of them might say all this shit, but they're going to go right in the booth and vote liberal Democrat, no matter what. Right? So they might have individual things they don't like, but that's not how they're voting.
Spring of 2026, I'm going to need every Black American who was a descendant of a slave to tell SCOTUS that the 14th Amendment was just for us. That part.
All right. So I don't know if people might recognize.
To be not have nothing, have hostile immigrants on top of them attacking Black people to the point they got to leave. black folks can't get no jobs because they don't speak a different language. Talk to black folks in LA and let them tell you that they can't get jobs in their own homeland because they don't speak a foreign language. I kind of laughed at Trump when he was talking about that. He say, I ain't learning your language, but he cussed in the middle of it. I thought it was kind of funny when he said that he ain't learning nobody's language. But black folks can't get a job.
Here's the problem with it. Here's where I just differ with this guy. It's true that a lot of the Hispanics who come over here, they're bilingual. There's no way that I'm going to belittle people or any people who are multilingual because they could use it to their advantage. If all the time we've been here in America as black folks, if we haven't had fortresses and things built to where we could protect them, so we could build on them, it's just too late to use racism as a reason why we need to have extra protection against the migrants if we are the same people voting for the mayors who are stabbing you in the back. Just Karen Bass, Mayor Wu, Brandon Johnson, Zoran Mondami, all of these guys, black people voted for them. I don't want to hear shit you got to say. You're assholes and you deserve everything you get. Because you didn't say, oh, you're not, they don't belong to Trump because he's a blonde-haired racist. So I don't want to hear the whining, the fact that your people can't read and are not bilingual. I hate to hear that because the fact they're not bilingual is a choice.
Because that's how much foreigners have taken over an American city that they won't even hire black Americans. And if they want to, they possibly want to hire someone. Well, do you speak Spanish? Speak Spanish, bro. Your homeland is South. It's not your homeland, bro. But this is what the Democrats have done. And it's the Democrats that's fighting Trump on this. It's the Democrats. Why? Because the Democrats have already made their pivot and their decision that we want to bring all the immigrants here and make them citizens, okay? So we can displace black Americans and their vote. Okay.
He's absolutely right about the Democrats, the liberals, and 92% of black women voted for these guys, and 80% of black men did. So you can't, so you got to, if we're going to call out the Democrats, we got to call out the fact that black folks voted for this shit. You voted for the same people who are displacing you. You voted for all of these guys who are stabbing you in the back, smiling in your face, Trojan horsing your asses, and you can't really complain afterwards. And if you can't even bring yourself to say why we're being displaced, and we can't really put the recognition by just saying Democrat is not good enough. Now, Malcolm X said that the liberal white man is the biggest enemy of Black Americans in the world. Now, he was right back in the 60s, but right now, the biggest enemy to black people is the black liberal woman, and the sycophantic black liberal men that followed.
Voting power.
The U.S. Supreme.
All right, so here's Anton Daniels and another one about birthright citizenship where this brother says his piece. And I just have to segue a little bit for you guys real quick. Anton Daniels ever since that collaboration with Corey Holcomb has gone through a lot of shit, right? And people came out of the woodworks trying to destroy this guy. Whether you like him or not, that's another thing. He's a big boy. He got his own shoulders. He does all this stuff. Then he lands a presentation or a collaboration or a conversation with Stephen A. Smith. And you kind of notice a lot of that stuff is dying away because whatever they tried to do to destroy this man didn't work. Didn't work because that conversation with Stephen A. Smith was a game changer for him. Anyway, so that's a segue. And so here we go, another brother talking about birthright citizenship. I got one more little piece to this thing, and then we can wrap this up with another person. So this is a good one. And the guy who comes after him.
Court will hear oral arguments on birthright citizenship. And I know a lot of you illegal, legal, and naturalized aliens are biting y'all motherfucking nails today. And I understand y'all gonna come out in droves because y'all feel like this impacts y'all. Y'all are only concerned about the 14th Amendment, but y'all don't understand how numerology works. 13 comes before 14, so the 13 tells you who the 14 is for, but you missed that part of history. Anyway, moving on beyond that, but I just can't, I just don't get it. People feel like, oh, I was born here, I'm an American, this and that and the third. You know, we're supposed to be higher than the animal kingdom as humans, right? Some of us, right? But we're supposed to be higher than the animal kingdom. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and I've been going to the zoo for many, many years. One of the things that we have at our zoo is called the African exhibit, and we have like this polar bear exhibit. And, you know, the only thing that I've never seen, we even have Australia exhibit. And the one thing I've never seen, although kangaroos are born inside of zoos in Kansas City, polar bears are too, those polar bears still think that they're polar bears. They don't think they're the Kansas City bears now. You know what I'm saying? And for some reason in nature, the Africanized bee, no matter how long that motherfucker been over here, ain't never became American. It became an Americanized bee. So how the fuck are these immigrants able to hop on a flight or float on a piece of cardboard or a mattress or whatever the fuck to get over here and this just lose their ethnonym, lose their heritage, lose their culture, and put on someone else's? You know what I mean? It's almost like you think that this is a pronoun. And on the issue of birthright citizenship, I really do hope that birthright citizenship does end in the United States, and then those countries that need birthright citizenship, like Africa, Haiti, the Caribbean, Jamaica, you know, all the kind of Venezuela, all the Latino communities that are migrating their asses to the United States of America, end it in the United States of America and started in those countries. Started in those countries. And now there's a different conversation when it comes to that, ain't it?
Yeah, because I can't just go over to another country with my girl and have a kid and then ultimately have that child be a naturalized citizen. But we have these crazy expectations here in the United States of America where the rules are supposed to apply to you, even though they were never meant for you and they were never created for you to be, but you still took advantage of it, right? And so I'm very curious what happens now that arguments have ended in birthright citizenship. And we also know that Trump not only is fighting for it, this is the reason why they're even taking it up, because he is the person that, you know, started the executive order, which then forced the Supreme Court to talk about it. But I'm trying to figure out why we're against Trump when he's the one that's working for Black people, specifically Black people that are from America and their ancestors were slaves and they had children here in the United States, often at times against their own will. And that's when it was created, and that's what it was created for. So that.
Let me just put a little correction in there. Trump is not necessarily fighting for Black people with his interpretation of the 14th Amendment that it was for slaves. He's doing this for his own benefit, right? On the backs of Black people, just like everybody else has gotten and used Black people for their own benefit. In this case, we're aligned with Trump, okay? But let's make no mistake that he's not doing this for us. Just like when the Republicans and those guys had the Civil War to keep the states together, you know, being freed slaves, being freed was a consequence of the war. It wasn't the purpose for it. All right. So we got to just keep that kind of clear. We don't have allies from that standpoint, only unless it aligns with what those guys want. So we'll take this one. I believe that the Chinese took advantage of a clause that was meant for us and never really said thank you. Okay. I believe that. And you know what? Half of them didn't realize that the 14th Amendment, they realized that the early people understood the 14th Amendment gave them an opening to get rid of a racist act that was against them. And that was the Exclusion of Chinese Act, which was a demonic act to begin with. But they used the 14th Amendment to get rid of that. And just like we used the 14th Amendment to get the rights that we have. So we got to keep that straight.
Those people that were born not because they wanted to be here, even though we benefit from being here now, from all of the things that our ancestors went through. I don't understand why other cultures can take advantage of it. And I was listening to Trump the other day, and he was like, yo, it's Chinese, millionaires and billionaires that have a ton of children, 75, a bunch of different children. And they all make sure that they have dual citizenship, not only from in China, but also here in the US. And we can't do that there. We can't take advantage of their laws there. It's not reciprocated. People take advantage of our economy, they take advantage of our people, and they take advantage of our culture. And more importantly, the laws that weren't even created for them, but we actually have people here in the US that's fighting for it. That's not even effective. Like, I see, respectfully, shout out to all of my whites in the building, because I rock with people based off of their character and not the color of their skin. I see liberal white people that are actually advocating against abolishing birthright citizenship. And I'm like, what? Like, if there's any more of a slam dunk situation where we really don't even have to debate about it, there shouldn't even be anything against abolishing this, because we've aged out of needing this, but people are still using it as a loophole and taking advantage of it. If there's ever a time where we should be getting rid of this, it is right now. It's very clear, and it's right there before our eyes. And it's crazy that we even got the president that's advocating for it, and he don't even benefit from it. But he's doing the thing that's in the best interest of America, and that's what we got. That's what we block. That's what we playing with. It's crazy, bro.
Right? Because it's America. It's the United States of America you want. So for all you motherfucking Caribbeans talking about the Americas, stop playing with us. You know what we're talking about. We're talking about those countries that fall under the United States Constitution. You don't. So we're not doing the America shit when we're talking about birthright citizenship, right? Any illegal, legal, or naturalized alien should have had the wherewithal to create their own pathways to citizenship. Therefore, when another groups and ethnic groups birthright citizenship ends, it doesn't affect them, right? But because they did not do that, they are not innovators. They do not create anything from necessity, the need to have it, right? They never thought that anything like this would happen, but it has. So again, we are hoping that birthright citizenship in these United States of America ends, and then y'all can go and start it wherever the fuck you want to. Go start it in Africa, Haiti, the Caribbean islands, anywhere but here. Take your ass home.
Arguments for birthright citizenship are over. I'm going to discuss the highlights from the oral arguments. So at the crux of the government's argument is this idea that within Juan Kim Ark, this old 1980s case that established birthright citizenship as interpreted from the 14th Amendment, is this hidden requirement for individuals to be domiciled in the United States.
I'm sorry for the whatchamacallit. Yeah, I just said this guy's soy boy over here. Yeah, he's pretty good. So we're gonna go ahead and start from the beginning again. And he's got a good kind of points. I don't necessarily disagree with him, but it's the kind of thing that could win for the left wing. Thanks for the heads up.
I'm going to discuss the highlights from the oral arguments. So at the crux of the government's argument is this idea that within Juan Kim Ark, this old 1980s case that established birthright citizenship as interpreted from the 14th Amendment, is this hidden requirement for individuals to be domiciled in the United States. That definition of domiciled, they basically come up with using very old English common law, maybe from what was understood at the time. One of the justices even mentioned, like, some of your citations are coming straight up from Roman law. These are long, very old citations. In any case, the way the government defines domicile is somebody is lawfully present in the United States and has intent to remain there permanently. Now, it's a bit of a formula that they're coming up with because really they are stretching this. Step one, you must be domiciled in the United States, and this has to be the parents. Again, lawfully present, intent to stay forever. That's domiciled. If you're domiciled, that means that you owe allegiance to the United States. Allegiance is back and forth. It means that you will do what the U.S. says and the U.S. will protect you. And they get allegiance from Elks versus Wilkins, where that is mentioned. Allegiance to the United States is the reason that Native Americans did not receive birthright citizenship. It's because their allegiance was to their tribal group. Also, Juan Kim Ark has some examples of other situations where there is no allegiance, such as the sons of foreign diplomats or the children of an invading army. There's very limited.
Well, listen, he's being narrow with what he says allegiance, especially in modern day. A lot of people are here as legal or otherwise, but illegally. They have no allegiance to the United States. The Somalis have no allegiance to our country. There's a lot of Israelis who have dual citizenship, have really no allegiance to the United States. Their allegiance is to their home country. So let's not act like it's one of these kind of simple things where when you use the word allegiance, it means different things to me. There's layers to it. But there's millions, unfortunately, because of our immigration strategy, there's millions of people who have absolutely no allegiance to this country, even though they're benefiting from whatever fruits we have left to supply. And therein lies the rub. So you could put your fingers together and keep it like it's just simple, narrow, but that's bullshit. There's millions of people who have no allegiance to us whatsoever across the diaspora. And that's a problem.
Circumstances where we don't have allegiance. But if you are domiciled, you are automatically showing allegiance. And if you
that's not true. It's not true. You could say you're domiciled and you're showing allegiance by being domiciled. That's just not true. You might try to interpret it that way, but it's not true. It's not.
Have allegiance, then that means that you are under their jurisdiction. And if you're under their jurisdiction, then you're of the jurisdiction thereof. And if you're born in the United States, then you are meeting all of the requirements of the 14th Amendment in order for you to get birthright citizenship. Temporary visitors or not. So there was a lot of holes in this. And I think that some of the justices did call them out. They called out what about slaves that came into the United States after the end of the transatlantic slave trade? Basically, they were smuggled in to sell into the United States. They didn't have lawful entry. According to the government's attorney, they didn't have a lawful entry.
This is the worst possible outcome, that the Supreme Court would throw this shit back to these shiftless, assholes in Congress to do anything with. And you're right, that might be a possibility. And it might be a way of passing the buck, because there's no way in hell that the Congress is going to do anything that can get, codified in the House or the Senate to go up to the president, and Trump won't be in office by then at all, to get codified as an amendment to the to the 14th Amendment. There's just no way. I mean, we can't even goddamn keep the government open over something that's funding the most fundamental agency that we put up after they brought down the trade centers. So if this goes back to Congress, you might as well kiss that and kiss it goodbye. Kiss it good. And you're absolutely right. This could be the possibility that SCOTUS hands this shit off. And Mr. ADHD president is going to try to make this, he's going to try to fight a war, which he's upside down in now, because he came out saying all this shit that's not true. And then he's going to be champion trying to get this thing through Congress. Forget about it. Just forget about it. You know what? But this is a good point. This is a very, very good point. Oh, man. Jeez.
But they were lawfully present because they were slaves. The next thing he kind of mentioned was, there's 500 scam artists in China trying to sneak people in for birth in the United States. Chief Justice John Roberts said that has no bearing on this case.
Well, listen, you know what? And this, I listened to the Soy Boy, and you know, the fact that there is a conspiracy that they can prove that there's 500 businesses or so spending billions of dollars building their own sleeper cells of impregnated women in the United States for whatever purpose, that has no bearing on the fact that of birthright citizenship is, you know, if John Roberts, who is a conservative, by the way, and there's probably some reason why, yeah, okay, so a couple of people are gaming the system, but that's not why we should change the law. Is that what he's saying? You know what I'm saying? Oh man, listen, we're in dire straits, right? You know, whatever that, you know, that band Dire Straits, the Sultan of Swing. Every time I hear that, I say Dire Straits, I think of that song.
I think some of the most compelling arguments came from like the 1866 debates that they cited, where, you know, they discuss the consequences. Like if we pass this law, if we pass the 14th Amendment, if we give this to everybody, that means that anybody that's just born here is going to have citizenship. And they were okay with that for 150 years of interpretation. As far as I can tell, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I am hoping for a unanimous decision. But at the very least, I do think that citizenship through birthright is here to stay.
And, you know, he's, you know, no matter what, whether I agree or disagree with him, his argument is just as strong as anybody else's right now. I got one more piece to this, and then we could talk about it, or we could end the show. The point really is Ann Coulter, right? You know, she can't stand, you know, she is white as white as could be. And that's the thing she stands for. But she has some cogent thoughts on this whole situation. And of course, you know what side she's on. But she's the last one. So there's a few minutes here. So bear with what she has to say. It's a couple of segments to that. Let's rock and roll.
Buck and I wanted to have you on because as we were watching the Supreme Court debate on birthright citizenship, you probably more than, first of all, thanks for coming on, but you probably more than anyone out there in the entire media space made this a real conversation worth having. And I really believe that one of the reasons why that debate occurred in the Supreme Court earlier this week was you. What was your reaction while you watched it? And what do you think, as a lawyer analyzing lawyer questions, is likely to come from this case?
Well, thank you. And I'm thrilled that it made it to the Supreme Court. It's sort of a confusing case because in simplest terms, the 14th Amendment, as I've said over and over again, and anyone vaguely familiar with American history knows, the 14th Amendment talk about who is a citizen applied only to freed slaves. It was about, the Supreme Court held that over and over and over again. And it's kind of obvious from the history of our country. We just fought a bloody civil war, all these 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment added. It was all about Black Americans. That's all.
The funniest shit in this whole thing is to hear Ann Coulter, you know, champion anything for Black Americans. The irony is just so funny. Like I said, like feminism, like everything else, when it pays in your favor, you know, it's funny to have an ally, because I agree with all that. That's exactly why the 14th Amendment was written from the founders, because that was the issue at the time. And it's a hard sell to think that they projected that thought into the future of writing it the way they wrote it, so it could be open for a park, Chinese park, and immigrants from around the world. And the only thing I could think about is that Matthew, I think 2018, I just think that when 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people are gathered together, if there's any Christian or any blessings to be had, I think that there's divine intervention. Listen, when 2 or 3 people get together to do something and they're in harmony, it's not additive. It's not. It's more like it's more than multiplicative. It's unbelievable with a couple of people together moving in a direction. You can move mountains. We have really a lot of examples where just a few people got together and changed the world, over the years. Gates and Balmer, it's just a small part of it. So regardless of what you think about Gates as a man, him and Balmer got together and they changed the way we compute. And that's just an extreme example, but really, people getting together in harmony change worlds. So when the founding fathers, white racist slave owners, wrote the Constitution and the amendments thereof, they were thinking about something bigger than themselves. And that's why we're where we are today, or else they would have codified it where it was explicitly stated that the 14th Amendment is to give Black slaves citizenship. We wouldn't be talking about that if they did that. We wouldn't. We would not be talking about it right now if they did that. Park would have never been able to overturn the Exclusion of Chinese Act on the 14th Amendment if it was written that way.
Was about. So what happened in the tricky thing is in Wong Kim Ark, you probably heard a lot about that, came up a lot in the discussion. The court found that a legal immigrant born in the US was a citizen. It shouldn't have held that. I think the decision was wrong, but it was trying to correct a ridiculous injustice of the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which not only forbade any Chinese citizens from entering the United States, but apparently re-entering. And this was applied to this kid who wasn't a kid, he was 21 years old. His parents had been living in the United States. They weren't allowed to become citizens because they were Chinese, but they were living legally here. They ran a business. They were here for, 20 years. He was born here. They went back to China. He continued to live here in the US, all in San Francisco with a home, jobs, businesses. And he had gone back to visit his parents. He comes back again and they won't let him enter. Now, what the Supreme Court should have done, and sorry, I hope this isn't getting too boring, but it's very important and it's vital to what John Sauer, the Solicitor General.
Clay is a legal nerd. He's super excited about it.
I'm actually loving this, Ann. So
He's
please
loving
keep
it.
going.
Okay, good. I'll wrap up the boring part quickly. What they should have ruled is under the 14th Amendment, the court had already held, and I think it's correct in Yik Wo, that the government can't deprive citizen or resident of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It should have been decided under that part of the 14th Amendment. I think it wasn't because illegal immigration didn't exist back then. I mean, for the first 400 years of our nation's history, we weren't a welfare state. So, you came to the US and sink or swim. As I described in Adios America, about 40% of immigrants used to go home because if they couldn't make it, they'd have to go back to Italy or back to wherever. So we didn't need rules on illegal immigrants. We weren't sinking them in the warm bath of social welfare. Now we have a big illegal immigration problem.
All right. So before we go on, I was looking at this comment. Ark's parents were not citizens, but they were here legally. They couldn't become citizens because of the Exclusion of Chinese Act, but they had a business. They actually left him with some assets when they went back. So he had property. He had some property, real property, when he came back to fight for citizenship. And I think that gave him a standing because there's clauses in that saying that you wouldn't be deprived of liberty, life, liberty, or property. So even though he wasn't a citizen, how did they deal with the fact that he had property that was left to him by his parents who were not here illegally, but they weren't citizens? So it left the Supreme Court. The fact that it actually got to the Supreme Court is a miracle in itself, by the way. You know what I'm saying? Because back then, white people, we got to face, they didn't really suffer any fools. If you got your shit up to the Supreme Court and you weren't white, that was a big deal. Because, they could have just offed his ass and have done with it. And we wouldn't be talking about him. That was 1898. You know, there was orphan people left and right, and you know nobody would have been the wiser. Yeah, he killed the president in the 1800s, right? So anyway, so I'm just saying that you know these are the kind of things that that if you're, I'm not saying I'm a student of history, but if you could look at some of these things unemotional, forgive my rants earlier, that this is a great civics lesson of what's going on and how one branch of the government to the other branch, how we play and how to, this is a testament to, and I know people don't like this because people hate America these days. This is a testament of how great our system, our government system is, not the people who are playing in it, but the way it's set up, right? The way it's set up, because if it wasn't set up this way, it would have crashed and burned a long time ago. And Trump is not the arbiter of that, by the way. He's just a man who you put the mantle on as the executive chief, the chief operating officer, and he's testing the boundaries of the American Constitution, which is, to me, okay. He's got to win in order to do the shit that he wants to do, but it has to pass through the judiciary, has to pass through Congress, it has to pass through. He could write 1,000 executive orders. They can't really be implemented, unless they get codified. Really, people are ignoring some of them outright, and he has too much shit going on to even notice. So I just think that we get blown out of things. So let's hear some more of Ann Coulter. I haven't seen her in a while. Age is catching up with her, but she's still got that flowy blonde hair.
I was wondering why Sauer was talking so much about domicile, and clearly what he was doing, and I think the case is clear, and I think he's right. You read through Wong R. Kim, and although the court was saying, well, he's a citizen, instead of saying he's a resident and you've taken his property. I mean, he has some property, he's paying rent, he has a bicycle, he has a coffee machine, he has clothes that he left here, he's lived here his whole life. What they were really distinguishing between is what I think we all want to distinguish between: legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. They didn't think of it back then because nobody talked about illegal immigrants. There were no illegal immigrants. But domicile is basically the same thing as legal immigrants. And luckily, blue states, with all the residents fleeing to cheaper tax jurisdictions, they have very strict laws about what constitutes a domicile. But you have to be living legally, obeying laws. You can have done nothing to disturb your allegiance to our country. Well, off the top of my head, illegal aliens have broken our laws by coming in illegally, residing illegally, often using illegal social security cards, to say nothing of, rape, DUIs, running drug cartels. Are they using fake IDs?
So let's kind of make a distinction, right? When you come into the United States illegally, you break a law. The very first time you do is Section 8, something, I think it's 1365, whatever. It's a misdemeanor. However, the sanctuary states and cities don't recognize that particular crime. They never ask for it. If you get stopped at the border by a government CBD, the Border Control Patrol, or an ICE agent, they're going to deport you immediately because you're not here under any asylum. You broke the law. And so the problem between states and federal government is that the sanctuary states don't recognize that as a crime they're going to actually identify and adjudicate. Okay, in the red states, they do. They'll find it illegal. If they ask the question, they find somebody's illegal, whether they committed one of the heinous crimes she talked about, deletion, this, that, and other thing, SA, and all that other stuff. They don't need that. As soon as they know you're illegal, they'll identify, or they'll talk to their ICE agents that they're in collaboration. Hey, we got one. This guy is illegal. Will you come get him and get him the hell out of our city? In the blue states, they don't do that. That's where the consternation comes from. That's the reason why the two people in Minnesota got killed, because the governor and the mayor put batteries in their back for them to act like assholes. And they put themselves in harm's way. Now, should they have died? No. I think the agents kind of overreacted, especially against a woman. But the other guy carried a gun to obstruction, and the agent who fired his gun into the ground should get fired, if you ask me. But these guys, they weren't innocent. Did they deserve to die? No, but they weren't innocent. And it wasn't the federal government who is solely responsible for their demise. It was the mayor and Walls who set their own citizenry up to turn into insurgents against the federal government. And I don't give a shit who doesn't like it. That's what I saw.
They're allegedly living in the shadows. Okay, that is not allegiance to our country. So the domicile argument is just a synonym for legal versus illegal. How did the children of illegal aliens ever get alleged citizenship in the first place? Well, the court has never held that. The Congress has never passed such a law. It was, as I describe in a chapter in Adios America, Justice Brennan gave us anchor babies. It was a footnote in a Justice William Brennan, lunatic liberal on the Supreme Court, in I think it was a 1983 case. It was a very recent case. I keep watching MSNBC and reading the New York Times, and they act like it goes back to the Mayflower if you're born on U.S. soil. Oh, no. Justice Brennan made it up out of whole cloth in 1982 in Plyler v. Doe. It was dicta, meaning, as you know, Clay, no legal bearing. No other justice signed on to it. He dropped a footnote saying, I see no difference in legal and illegal immigrants. Well, there's the difference that one's legal and one's illegal. There's kind of a big difference. So that's really what we're driving at. And that's part of the reason I've been very insistent that we call the children of illegal aliens anchor babies. This isn't about birthright citizenship, which every headline calls it. Birthright citizenship is the child born to legal immigrants living here with our consent. We have invited them. I mean, I think we've invited way too many. Nonetheless, they are here legally. Children born on U.S. soil to legal immigrants are a completely different category from, an 8-month pregnant Mexican who runs across the border. Citizenship shouldn't be a game of Red Rover, I beat you. I hid from Border Patrol and dropped away, baby. Ha, ha, ha. You can't do anything.
Listen, is she right or not? I think she's absolutely correct. She's right. Now, that's not how I felt before, but I never looked at it from that distinction. I never thought about people gaming the system for their advantage. A Chinese billionaire, impregnating, 100 to 200 women here in America, so his seed could become an American army, so that he funds, educates, has as a sleeper cell to do whatever he wants with once they become of age. Do you understand? I didn't think about that. And so this whole notion that people just are dropping babies here so they can somehow have a tether to the United States and be able to grift and benefit from the generosity of our country. And it is generosity, and it's going to destroy us. It will, because we give, not only are our senators and our congressmen fleecing the hell out of us, we're actually letting the rest of the world fleece us as well. Right? So everybody's fleecing the hell out of the taxpayer. That's why our young people can't afford to do anything, because they're in so much debt. Their future is bleak. They think in bleak thoughts. And now we're giving them whatever left away to illegal aliens and to war and to all of those kind of things. And it's just at some point, there's going to be a breaking point. It's going to be a breaking point. We can't just keep fleecing the American population without somehow it being a reset.
Well,
Thank you.
and can I jump in just to ask you about, so you're talking about the crossing over the board. By the way, you guys can read Anne's latest on this on her Substack. But the thing that I believe, and this came up actually with Sauer and it was Justice Roberts, and it was, I feel like it was really just Justice Roberts saying, yeah, if this collapses America and it's the end of us, sorry, that's the deal. But he's talking about how if you have people who can come here from China specifically to game the system, where they come here and they're probably lying on those forms and there's some laws they're breaking, of course. They come here, they have a baby here, they go back to China, and then at age 18, they say, hey, I'm applying to UCLA as an in-state U.S. citizen resident in California. Oh, and I want to have my whole family brought in along with me. So it's like basically a version of the anchor baby scam, just run over a different timeline. How is this supposed to be a country if the Supreme Court tells us, which I'm worried they might, yeah, that's totally legit. As American as apple pie, the guy who's lived in Beijing for 20 years and spent, his first 5 days in America.
Yes, and one of the stunning things that came out in oral argument was when General Sauer said he was asked how many birth tourism quote citizens there are in the U.S., and he gave some figures. It's estimated, 100,000, maybe more than 100,000. But he said there are 50, I think. It wasn't 500, was it? 50.
No, it's 500. 500.
Okay, thank you. I just said,
yes.
I was about to say it, and I thought, that can't be 500 birth tourism businesses in China.
Yes.
It's utter madness. No country would do this. The reason the domicile issue was so big, I thought it was kind of weird because you've never heard anyone argue that. Read Wong Kim Ark and you understand it. Domicile is a proxy for legal versus illegal. Oh, and I will also say for your viewers who consume the mainstream media, I noticed that the media, they've already decided how the case is coming out, and maybe they're right, but as Clay knows, you can never tell from oral argument. And in particular, there were tough questions on both sides. The tough questions for our side, i.e. truth and justice, liberal commentators take as well. See, they're giving away their positions. They don't like what Sauer's saying. The tough questions for the other side, they're just testing their arguments. How do you know it's not the reverse? So the point is, you don't know, we don't know. It seems to me the most logical answer to this is to go with the domicile, which as a proxy for legal versus illegal, this does not go back to the Mayflower. It doesn't go back to the 14th Amendment. It goes back to dicta in a footnote in a Justice Brennan opinion from the 80s.
And you.
All right. So that's it. That's it. So she said her part. You guys got to figure out where you fall. Now, whether we figure it out or not, it's going to fall one way or the other. So who believes that no changes to the 14th Amendment? When we say change, I don't think there's going to be a physical change to the words. I'm thinking, is there going to be a reinterpretation of what the words say and what they mean? So I don't think you have to physically rewrite anything. I just think that are we going to set a precedent that the meaning of that, the way those words are written, we could take them any way other than the way they are written. Because if you got to go in and change some of the words, forget it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, especially if you've got to go through Congress. Because we've already figured out that our Congress is worthless for the most part. They're shiftless beings who are just sucking us dry. They hate Americans. And I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. None of them are working in our best interest. They're working in their own best interest. We need term limits. We need to stop insider trading. We need to do a few things. We need to say if they shut down the government, it should apply to them as well. They should lose checks. So listen, we're in such dire straits as a country because of the government that we allowed to grow and fester out of our two-party system. And we're in big trouble. You guys are in big trouble. I'm 67, You guys, some of you are 40, some of you are younger, some of you have young children. I got younger children. I pray for them every day. They're grown, but They're still a lot younger than I am. And I want them to have the best. But, if I don't know how much we could sustain. And we said this, I've said this now. Somebody said this 10 years ago. Somebody probably said it 40 years ago. But we got to know that we're coming to a breaking point. We just do. And we can't even buffer the people who are legalized American citizens. And if we have another time where another 20 million people are allowed to come over the border unvetted, and we have to pay for them in sanctuary states and sanctuary cities, and they're having babies. They're having more babies than Americans are. White Americans are not having babies. Black Americans are not having babies, even though we have a baby mama problem. They're deleting more babies than anybody else. So the deletion rates are up. So, and then when the other people come over, they're putting out 5 and 6 and 10 kids. So listen, I'm telling you, I don't, so we're in for it. You guys are in for it. Anyway, I just wanted to, kind of change it up as it talk about men and women and all this kind of stuff. Birthright citizenship is front and center. There's something that's going to be decided. You guys tell me what you think is going to happen. I have a feeling that the Supreme Court is going to punt. I have a feeling they're going to punt. If they do anything that sends it back down to lower courts, if they do anything that says it needs to be sent back down to Congress, they might as well have punted because nothing's going to happen. Right? What does that mean to Trump? He'll go on to something new, right? He'll put out some kind of stupid tweet or some kind of idios, whoever he has writing these stupid thread posts, he's going to put out something that's going to be incendiary and dumb. And I think we're pretty much numb to it now. But it's going to happen. He's going to curse the Supreme Court if he doesn't get his way, blah, blah, blah. Kind of like a petulant child. And I think he's going through the swing, right? You're a little kid, 5, 6 years old. You're petulant. You get a point where you mature. And now when you're 75 and 80, you turn back into the same petulant child you used to be. And, it's unfortunate because he's blown it for the J.D. Vances and the Marco Rubios and all those kind of guys who probably could be good leaders if he doesn't blow all the GOP progress out of the window with his stupidity. You know what I'm saying? Really, I got to say that. I want to leave Trump alone, but he's got to stop. He's got to shut up. He's got to shut up. I do. I want the GOP to have a chance to make our country conservative, because through the conservative party and through the conservative thought, we might get certain things back, like Christianity, like shame, like the governors that govern things that matter that you can build on, family and stuff like that. We're not going to get that if we go down this communist path that New York is already lost. California is already lost. If they need that California governor to be a Republican, they have some hope there, but they got those super majorities that are very scary. They do a lot of stupid things. So anyway, thank you, Catelia, and everybody else who popped up. And I appreciate you guys coming in and being in the chat. I didn't know what I was going to expect talking about this particular subject. Sometimes it's good to have people come up and we have a panel. Excuse me, I guess, I've got this congestion. But anyway, it was good. And I'll be here next week, on Monday with something else to talk about at 7:00 Eastern. So come on back and stuff like that. With Black Man Unfiltered, we're here. It's the Boomer Show. Tomorrow, I think we're flipping tables. Wednesday there's a sports show, and then there's another liberal show after that. I don't know what the title is. And there might be something else on Friday. Every so often we do a barbershop. We haven't had one in a little while, but maybe it'll come back. And just stay tuned to the Black Man Unfiltered network. If you want to come over for political commentary on my channel, Marriage, Politics, and Sports, I do a lot of political reactions to the president, to Caroline Levitt, to whoever else is over there. So you can come back and check me out over there. And so there you go. So you know what? On this channel, we don't have an outro anymore. I don't know. On the Black Man Unfiltered, he used to have a nice outro. He doesn't do it, so we're gonna have to get on BMU for that. You okay? So other than that, I just end the stream. And the next time, maybe the next live we do Cotillia, we'll have something to play. Anyway, let me get out of here and have a good night, everybody. I'm gonna go kiss the wife, tell her I'm still here and all that kind of stuff. See her smile and say, "Oh man, I'm happy with my husband," that kind of shit. I'll see you guys later. All right, have a good evening, everyone.